cardiac output is quite essential to learning some of the more advanced topics that are present. Some of them include the venous return, the effect of the arterial pressure, the pressure regulation, and all that stuff. So we're going to start with the most basic one because I kind of want to branch out from this topic into the other topics that are a little bit more specific, but you will not understand them unless you know major amounts of cardiac output. This video again is just a starter video. It's mainly aimed at students who are looking to understand cardiac output as a whole thing over a course of videos. So let's go into the definition of the cardiac output. I have my kind of notes right here for everyone asking about the notes. These are just handwritten notes, and this is just the way I study anyway. So the definition, right? Cardiac output is the amount of blood that is being pumped into the aorta by the heart, specifically the left ventricle, per minute, right? So it's very important that you know that it's per minute because the answer changes. If like it just asks you how much can the left ventricle pump, it's just 70 ml, but over a minute that comes around to 5,000 ml, which is around 5 liters a minute, right? So now venous return, I'm taking these two definitions close enough so that I can compare both of them. Venous return is the amount of blood that is coming into the right atrium during the diastole. If you remember, we studied the cardiac cycle during the diastole when the blood is going into the right atrium. So the amount of blood that is going into the right atrium and it will further go into the pulmonary circulation. That blood, the amount of that blood is the venous return. Now it's important because ideally, if you think about it, cardiac output should be equal to the venous return. In medicine, you'll find all of these factors that have the similar numerical value, but the definitions are very different and the concepts are totally different. So I don't want you to confuse between them. So that's why I took the both the definitions at the same time so I could clearly differentiate between the two. So the normal values of cardiac output. So for males, it comes around to I think 5.6 liters per minute. That's for the average male, adult average male, and for the average adult female, it comes around to 4.9 liters per minute. So it averages out to around 5. We're in the question if the answer is given 5 liters per minute, that's probably the right answer. Unless it's like a calculated question. Then you'll just have to calculate the answer. Now we're looking at the physiological factors that are affecting the cardiac output. So with this, basically what I want to explain to you is that the various physiological factors that are present in the body, they will also try affecting the cardiac output, right? Like I have it right here, the metabolism. For a person who has a higher metabolism, they will have a higher cardiac output, right? For a person who is doing a lot of exercise, like they're skipping, they're running, or regularly they have been exercising for a long time, they just have a stronger heart, so their cardiac output is also much more. Actually, we'll come into this exercise portion in a little bit. Uh, I'm going to explain how exactly exercise is increasing the cardiac output and everything, and what are the benefits. And I'll talk about that in a bit. Then age. The older you get, the cardiac output will obviously decrease. Why? Because the heart is degenerating. Size. Again, we're talking about the size of the person, not the heart. So in general, like a good way to understand this is that when the size of a person changes, the metabolism changes, which will then affect the cardiac output, right? Now we go into the cardiac index. Cardiac index is basically the cardiac output per unit surface area of the body. So the human body, I think it's around 1.7 meters square, I believe. And the cardiac output is around 5 liters per minute. So if we divide them, we can get what 1.7 times 3 is around 5.1, so close enough. So Normal value is around 3. Now, the value is kind of important because cardiac output is measured in liters per minute per unit surface area is the value of the cardiac index. Now, the effect of age. I'm going to show you a graph that will make this very clear, right? So this is the graph, this is the cardiac index, and this is the age of the person, right? Look how the cardiac index is increasing during the formative years, like till the guy is around 5, 6 years of age. But then it has a steady decline. It's going to keep decreasing and it won't come back up. Why? Because you have to understand that when a person is growing up, even though, like here, we can kind of say that the surface area is the same, but the cardiac output keeps increasing. That's why the cardiac index is going up here. But here, what happens, there's a slight change. The rate of increase of cardiac output is less than the increase in surface area. So, over a period of time, if we see that the cardiac output is increasing by X amount and the surface area of the person is increasing by Y amount, Y is going to be more than X. Since cardiac index is inversely proportional to surface area and it's directly proportional to cardiac output, so we can say that this is going to keep decreasing, right, because of simple fractions. So this is just what I wanted to show just graphically. The graphical interpretation of this can is very common. It can come whenever you want, really. uh, then we have the normal value done, effect of age is done. So now we're doing the Frank-Starling law. Now the Frank-Starling law, we have checked this out beforehand. In my past videos, I have actually talked about the Frank-Starling law a lot. So basically, what it means is that the force of contraction of the heart is directly proportional to the end diastolic volume, right? Now, how does it affect the venous return and how does it affect the cardiac output? Now, you have to understand what is the end diastolic volume. At the end of the day, what is it? So, the end diastolic volume at the end of the day is simply, uh, how do I put this? It's the venous return, right? If the venous return increases, the end diastolic volume has to increase. Why? Because in the diastole, the venous return is just the blood that is coming through the uh, atria, right? The right atrium. It's going to go through there and it's going to deposit in the right ventricle. So that is basically the venous return. So when the Frank-Starling, according to the Frank, the end diastolic volume increases as the venous return increases, which in turn increases the contraction of the heart. Right? We talked about this before. If you've been paying attention, you'll catch on very quickly that the cardiac output also increases, which is why we we can kind of attach this label to venous return that it's the main proponent of the cardiac output. Whatever changes happen to the venous return, the cardiac output will show similar changes. Right? Now let's look at the Bainbridge reflex, which is a quite a common Viva question, I believe. Bainbridge reflex is basically what happens when the venous return is increasing. The It's going into the atria, right? So the atria starts getting bigger, obviously because the blood is accumulating. So there is a stretch in the atrial fibers, which causes a reaction or a nerve impulse, if you will, from the stretch receptors. Now this is going to go through a pathway and it will go to the vasomotor center of the brain and it will come back to the heart in the form of sympathetic and vagus nerve fibers, which will then affect the sinus nodal fibers of the heart. Remember, we talked about them in the conducting system of the heart. So it will increase the rate of firing as well as the contractility of the heart. So this increase in contractility and this increase in the firing rate of the sinus node will cause the heart to pump faster and stronger, which is the Bainbridge reflex. Okay, so it's almost an anticipatory reflex that the heart kind of anticipates that, okay, the blood is going to be more, so I need to start contracting more because it probably means that somewhere in the body we need to pump more blood, right? So when is a heart limiting factor in cardiac output? So this is the question that most people ask, that okay, if venous return is the main proponent, when does the heart actually play a role? So the concept behind this is kind of easy, but it's difficult at the same time. You need to be very clear about this. When the returning amount of blood to the heart is more than the amount of blood that can be pumped by the heart, you get this. The amount of blood pumped by the heart is the cardiac output, while the returning amount of blood is the venous return. But the venous return is going to supersede the cardiac output. Then the actual contractility and the contraction of the heart will matter, right? Why? Because if the contractility does not increase, if it does not increase, there's going to be some amount of blood that's always going to remain in the ventricles, causing a pooling of blood, right? This causes a pooling of blood, and this can have catastrophic damages, because obviously if the blood is going to pool, n number of things can go wrong. It can get inflamed, there can be uh, trauma to the heart, the muscle fibers can be damaged, tamponade can happen. There's a lot of problems, right? So this is like a question that's not very common. It's I think it's kind of common, but the thing is that the answer, people don't answer this question. They don't understand this line, because in the textbook there's just this one line, that the returning amount of blood has to be greater than the blood being pumped, but no one actually explains the concept, the nuance behind this line. It's a very powerful line. So now we talk about long-term cardiac output versus the peripheral resistance. Now, what is the peripheral resistance? Peripheral resistance is the resistance to blood flow offered by the various blood vessels, and wherever the blood needs to get pumped, the vessels have to be filled by blood, right? When the blood is going through the aorta and through the arteries, the blood is kind of filling the tubes. So those tubes, the will offer some resistance, because nothing really wants to change. If you want to pump it, there's going to be some sort of resistance. So that is basically the peripheral resistance. So I have this graph that I wanted to show you before we come to the formula. Right, this is the cardiac output, this one, and this is the arterial pressure in a, like, this level is the arterial pressure, which we don't want it to change. And this is increasing, this is the total peripheral resistance. So when we go this way, peripheral resistance is increasing. By the graph, you can see that the cardiac output is decreasing. Now, why is it decreasing? The cardiac output will keep decreasing as the peripheral resistance increases, because how is it supposed to pump? It will be inversely proportional, right? When the peripheral resistance will be very low, then it can quite easily overpower the tubes and it can just rush the blood through. So the cardiac output is naturally going to be quite high. So this is the basic understanding that I can create about it. Just try to understand it through the resistance. Don't try to think that only this formula, which is basically here, cardiac output is equal to arterial pressure divided by the total peripheral resistance. No, try to understand it based on this resistance format, because a question can be asked: what happens if a person loses a limb? What then? Then, you know if you just look at the graph, then if you remove the arms, then the peripheral resistance is going to increase, which basically means two things. If the cardiac output has to remain normal, then the arterial pressure has to increase. But arterial pressure can only increase to a certain amount. So after a certain amount, the cardiac output will start falling, which is why the person will eventually die. Right? It will either die for loss of blood first, or he'll die due to the failure of the cardiac output. The cardiac output is not enough due to cardiac insufficiency. The person dies. Factors that affect the causing the hypereffective heart. Hypereffective heart is basically a heart that can pump a lot. Nervous factor, parasympathetic, sympathetic. I think it's very simple. It would be kind of insulting if I ask you what parasympathetic, sympathetic means, but I will still clear up. Sympathetic is basically going to increase your heart rate, and parasympathetic will decrease the heart rate. As simple as that. Vagal effect, not vagal effect. Adrenal effect, well, kind of, but not really. Uh, what's the mass effect, you ask, of the hypereffective heart? For the hypereffective heart, it can go up to 25 liters per minute, which is actually the top for high performing athletes. Hypertrophy. Okay, here I wanted to talk to you guys about this factor. So there's two forms of hypertrophy. There can be physiological hypertrophy, which is a good thing, and there's a pathological hypertrophy that's a very bad thing, right? Physiological hypertrophy is great because what it basically means is that the heart gains muscle over time because the heart has to pump so much, right? It has to pump so much blood through the body, and if it's being exercised enough, like all muscles, like the gym goers who are regularly doing their curls, they have huge biceps, right? Personally, yeah, obviously I don't go to the gym too much, but yeah, so they'll keep doing curls, and you'll see these massive biceps. Same thing happens to the heart. If you keep pumping the heart and the heart keeps pumping, then the body automatically kind of adds the muscle fibers to it. So that causes hypertrophy, which will cause an overall increase in the cardiac output. If the cardiac output increases, the athletes get tired less, they have better blood supply, they eventually their hearts will even live long, right? It's very good. Pathological is bad because there's a second thing that happens along with hypertrophy. In this particular kind of in pathological hypertrophy, what will happen is that the heart is getting bigger in size, but not a lot of muscle fibers are being added to it. So there's a dilatation that is formed, the dilatation that is being formed in the heart, right? So the heart muscle fibers become very weak. So they themselves are not capable of contracting that heart, so they cannot send enough blood through to the organs. Therefore, that will eventually cause cardiac failure. I want to talk about this part a little bit, as mentioned before. Excuse me. Now, factors causing hypoeffective heart. Hypoeffective heart is basically a heart that's not pumping, exact opposite of hypereffective. I'm not even sure why I'm explaining this. You don't need to know this, but anyway. So, hypertension. If the arterial pressure goes up and the peripheral resistance, like we talked about this before, right? How arterial pressure is kind of, where is it? Okay, arterial pressure is directly proportional to cardiac output. Here, however, if in hypertension, if it goes too far, then the cardiac output will eventually decrease. The mechanisms for this we will cover in the upcoming videos where I'm going to talk about pressure regulation. But for now, just have this understand. Nervous system, basically, if you stimulate anything vagally, and the rate of firing and the contraction will decrease. Then pathological ones, which is coronary artery disease, valvular, congenital heart diseases like tetralogy of Fallot, and all that's called pulmonale and everything. So these diseases, the congenital valvular and coronary artery, these are pathological diseases that aren't really important to us right now. Just you need to know that they will cause a hypertrophic heart. If I'll just say one line of each. In coronary artery diseases, the arteries are getting blocked, which is why the peripheral resistance keeps increasing, so cardiac output goes down. Valvular diseases, there is cardiac insufficiency, the heart is not able to pump enough because of cooling of blood or whatever. In congenital, there can be a myriad of reasons. Every congenital defect has its own reason, like atrial septal defect, ventricular septal defect, and everything. So that's basically about the pathological ones. Then myocarditis and hypoxia are kind of the broad spectrum disorders that we're talking about. Myocarditis is inflammation of the heart musculature, which will cause cardiac insufficiency, right? And hypoxia is basically failure of the heart to get enough oxygen, which will cause degeneration of the muscle fibers. Now, the role of nervous system. Okay, I'm going to talk to you about this experiment I have here. So, dinitrophenol. Dinitrophenol is basically a drug that is going to increase the metabolism a lot, right? Of the tissues, I think it's like 4 or 5 times the metabolism will increase, which basically means that the peripheral resistance that is being offered will increase dramatically, right? So, sorry, it will decrease, right? Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, if the metabolism increases, there's going to be secretion of a lot of vasodilatory factors, which will cause vasodilation, which decreases the peripheral resistance. I just ate, man. I'm kind of tired, but anyway, we move. So the cardiac output will keep increasing. See, look, this is with nervous control. So cardiac output ideally should increase, and it is increasing. What if we cut off the autonomic nervous control of the heart? If the autonomic nervous control is cut off, then you can see the cardiac output is not changing, right? Because it doesn't need to change. Because the nervous control was making it go up, and now it's gone. So why would it change? Here we have the arterial pressure. Now, ideally, we want the arterial pressure to remain the same, and this is, can be used as like a slight trick or a rule of thumb. Whenever there's a question in physiology which is going to say that, okay, how will this affect the arterial pressure or the cardiac output? If it's like a normal question, I mean, it's not introducing any pathology or any imbalance into the question, the arterial pressure mostly will never change because the body will by itself try to control the arterial pressure to its natural level. So a lot of the changes that will happen all around the arterial pressure, but will not touch it. Right? A slight trick. It's better to understand the concept, but if you're not getting the answer and you need to make a educated choice, which we basically call guessing, uh, this can be a good option, right? Uh, Now arterial pressure is coming around to around 100 mmHg, which is normal, 120 over 80. So we can see that the arterial pressure keeps going down. Why does it go down, you ask? Because arterial pressure is what? Basically, it's the pressure exerted on the walls, and if the walls are getting broader because of vasodilation and everything, the pressure is going to decrease if there is no nervous control. So that's the dinitrophenol experiment. And lastly, is the exercise effect, which is an anticipatory effect that happens in the circulatory system. Basically what happens is that the during exercise, when we're starting to exercise, the heart kind of gets an anticipatory signal from the nervous system which causes it to pump uh, more effectively, like pump more, contractility increases, the rate of contraction will also increase. All this stuff increases because of an anticipatory nervous impulse that is sent from the brain, right? Mostly because I believe the reason is that there is some spillage of when you start exercising, you're breathing quite deeply, so there's some spillage of those nerve fibers into the vasomotor center, which sends this uh, effect. No one will ask you what the anticipatory effect is exactly, but if they ask you if the examiner doesn't like you at all, or he woke up on the wrong side of the bed, this is our kind of backup. Okay, we still know this and we're going to get the marks. Okay, this was it about the cardiac output. I'm going to talk about the venous return later in another video. So stay tuned for that. And thank you for your time. And I'm going to be signing off. Please like the video, comment, whatever. I realize that I kind of forget to tell this. So whenever I remember, I just say it.